Welcome to the Movidiam Podcast. Join the conversation with global innovators as they share their journeys, discuss the state of the industry, and share insight into the future of media for brands, agencies, and production companies.
Hello and welcome to the Movidiam Creative Leaders Podcast. Today I'm delighted to welcome Jessica Ringshall, Managing Director at the BCMA, the Branded Content Marketing Association. Jessica, welcome to the Movidiam Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Branded content is a very in vogue term, Jessica. Looking at your background, you've obviously got a huge amount of experience from assisting producer all the way to the head of content production at Grey London, one of the largest sort of agencies out there. And what made you make the move to the Branded Content Marketing Association?
As you say, I had a long term at Grey, and I went from being a very traditional producer all the way through to developing really interesting kind of integrated campaigns, and ended up really kind of focusing in on branded content as being my sort of specialism. I think that where I've ended up in terms of being the managing director of the BCMA, I think has been very much a personal journey. I think during my period at Grey, understanding, I actually started in television, so I actually started as a researcher. I was really interested in media from that perspective, and I was really passionate about telling stories, and I really liked delving down into people, and I worked for a long time in sort of factual entertainment. So when I made the move into advertising, which was this great behemoth, this big industry that I had to learn all the processes and all the understanding and all of the kind of different hierarchies in which how you work within an agency, I felt like there was so many layers to how that process worked. So learning how to make a television ad, I did that for a long time, and it was very exciting. I loved the creative process. I liked being part of a team. I really enjoyed working with brands. I find working with clients really exciting. But during that journey, more and more, obviously, because as the digital revolution came in and we started needing to make more and more assets, and of course the original kind of core assets of a television ad wouldn't necessarily translate well into all these other mediums and different platforms. I felt really passionately about trying to look at the effectiveness of everything we were making against all those different channels. And we were being asked to, carve up a television ad to work on a banner, or work, take a still and put it into print. And, none of it felt, super fit for purpose, frankly, for me at that stage. So as I became kind of getting better at my craft and having a great network and being able to produce lots and lots of different kind of work, the stuff that was landing on my desk as a producer just started looking more and more like what I felt was entertainment out in the real world, as it were, not necessarily just in advertising, not just about telling consumers about a product or a service or what a brand is doing. It felt like actually the creative agency I was at was trying to engage more deeply with consumers. So that was fine. I could go out and I could go and produce, I could go and, cut deals in Soho and make really fabulous content that could sit, on all these different, digital platforms. And there were great ambitions from the agency to make sure that they were going to be super successful without necessarily looking at a paid-for media plan, or I began to get really frustrated by that. I felt like I could go and make the best content in the world, and unless there was a really well thought through strategic plan around what that distribution was and why we were making it and why the brand was making it, I felt quite frustrated. So I actually ended up, during the period of which I became head of content production, I felt like I needed to have a greater understanding about distribution models and, how we can go about and actually partner with IP that already exists in the world, how our creative solutions could be set more around partnerships rather than just the ideation from within the agency. So I spent a long time, building up my network in terms of understanding how do media agencies work? How do commissioners work? How does a film studio operate? Why how can a brand, play a really powerful role with all of these different distribution sort of outlets.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. That was a soliloquy of such an interesting journey from, all those. There are a couple of key words that I picked out there. I think one of them was being hierarchy, and I think hierarchy of a large advertising organisation. I mean, that is under pressure right now, and it's evolving. And I think when you think about the word, content, especially, it's a real catch-all because it catches all the bits, whether it's an Instagram story or a TV commercial or a Superbowl advert. But you're absolutely right. The punctuation or the language of each platform predetermines, the type of material that needs to be on that platform. Otherwise the user consuming it sees it as not authentic or a shortcut. So actually, it's an exciting time as a producer or creator of these things if you understand the language of the platform.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of my passion points actually as part of the BCMA is because when I was sitting in a department within a large advertising agency, I was expected to know everything about these new platforms. I was expected to understand what is needed, what consumers want. So yes, I can go and speak to the strategists, and yes, we can all sit together as a team, but I also needed to go on my own journey to really understand that. And I think that's why actually I've ended up in a place where I feel really strongly about educating and giving people the tools to become really powerful content practitioners. They might be in media, they might be in production, they might be in post-production, they might be at a creative agency, they might be brands. Everybody is trying to work out the language of all of these platforms and the language of and the way in which we speak to our consumers and audiences, and that's the bit I feel really strongly about.
That's interesting. I think you touched on an interesting point there, so how you're expected to know all these platforms. I mean, of course, they're so new and fresh, and actually the economic model of these agencies, I mean, you couldn't do the tinkering and playing around with them that was required because you had so much throughput going through and demand to make sort of television commercials until it kind of all breaks down. It's very difficult. And what's your feeling now about the sort of, where the value lies in the sort of production space? I mean, is television still the lion's share of what all these creative agencies around the world are creating for, or is those budgets shifting towards other platforms to storytelling?
I think that there is a shift in where these budgets are moving, but I think that, one of the challenges that creative agencies particularly have is that their core business at the moment and the way that they're structured and the way they charge clients, the way that they either retain or, I think that's the struggle in terms of getting to the appropriate answer for a client. So, and I think that creative agencies have huge ambition to genuinely deliver a huge suite of, creative output for brands, and a large part of that, I think that creative agencies really want to be developing really effective branded content. But I think that in terms of time frames, when you're looking at campaigns, when you're looking at sort of marketing directors being in a job for only perhaps 2 years, I think that there's still needing to get the work out there fairly quickly, and I think that people perhaps aren't clued up enough about how to properly structure a branded content campaign with branded content being at the heart of that. And so I think that budgets are getting smaller for things like television because there's just a greater need for assets. So the way that you have to carve up your budget is different. But I also think that because the way that you get to the appropriate answer around branded content takes longer, I think that that's the sticking point that I see at the moment. And I think that's because branded content has to be authentic, whatever form it's in, native, video, product placement, whatever sort of piece of entertainment they're trying to create, it needs to be authentic, and the story has to be of value for the people watching it. And sometimes that can be very complex for brands to distill that down.
But the ROI piece, obviously, if you're a big CMO of a big business which kind of delivers a piece of exceptional branded content, and you maybe has a Hollywood actor inside what is a sort of a piece of branded content, is the process of selling that in and the awareness, is that directly related to sales of the product? I mean, this is a big challenge that producing video has, isn't it? Unless it's directly hitting the bottom line, some people struggle to commission it.
Yes, I think that's right, and I think there's a little bit of misconception that a long-term investment in brand identity and that brand story story that you're trying to tell. So you have to pick a lane and you have to drive that message, and perhaps that will take time. But I think technology has allowed the short-term component of branded content to work really well. Social media is an amazing channel in which, you know, branded content can be really effective and can work very quickly, and therefore, you know, PR, you know, can be really powerful in that space as well. I think that in terms of the ROI, I think it is harder to have to see that line go up at that specific point at which the branded content goes out in the same way that television does. So I think that's the complex piece, and I think that's a slightly rewiring of how you look at campaigns and when you are looking at what you want your results to be. But we did quite a lot of work with Ipsos, and actually created a new measurement tool with them in order to look at branded content and not just look at those kind of vanity metrics. You know, so you know, there are a lot of resources out there, but again, it's about what you're doing alongside that branded content as well as a whole suite of, you know, marketing tools. What's the consistent strand through it all?
Does the influencer, the influencing marketer, or the influencer on the social networks that's producing a lot of content sort of fall under your remit today, or how brands are trying to access those people, or is that cooled off a bit now? The people with a video with an iPhone and a million people following them.
Very much sits under our remit, and it's one of the things that, again, I mean, I feel like, you know, currently it is absolutely the Wild West. I think that over the last year or so, there's been a lot more kind of regulation around how brands use, you know, social influencers and how audiences experience that brand-funded messaging. One of the things that we're doing at the BCMA is we do have a large, you know, influencer program where we are trying to standardize some of those processes. So, you know, for a starting point, we're working with influencers directly to give them accreditation so that when they work with brands, that brand knows that they are very clear on, you know, the legal side of working on those on different platforms, that they're they're really clear on how to deliver what a brand needs. Because, you know, I know that lots of brands really struggle to work with social influencers sometimes because the brief might go out and social influencer says, well, I'll interpret it in my way and I will, and, you know, we'll end up, you know, where we are. And so we're working hard. It's a big task, but we're working hard to try and put some parameters within that space for both sides of the coin, you know, being able, you know, for brands to feel more confident about investing in that social influencer space.
And if I think about, you know, the sort of the Superbowl ad being the sort of the holy grail to as a kind of creative or a director to kind of deliver a piece of work at that level, you know, are you seeing, you know, examples of exceptional work that perhaps isn't seen by everyone, but specifically crushes the brief for the client because it's so precision targeted and the message is so clean? So I suppose what I'm trying to say is, you know, should that be the destination that everyone aspires to be, making a television advert or making a Super Bowl commercial, when actually there's a hell of a lot of productivity and value across many, many different areas that weren't even accessible 2 or 3 years ago?
Absolutely. And I think that television advertising still is incredibly impactful and still is very effective, and I think is still a very core part of the marketing makeup. I think the Super Bowl ad absolutely has its place, and I think that for certain brands, particularly large, you know, global mass market brands, it's incredibly, you know, you have a captured audience. You're going to where that audience is. You know, the content itself in terms of the actual football game is the thing that's filtering everybody down in. So I don't think there's a one size fits all for any brand now. I think that everybody, and I think this is one of the challenges, is I think that brands feel like they potentially need to be operating in every touch point, and perhaps you know, looking at that content strategy and thinking about product launches and thinking about your ongoing brand messaging. I think marketers do need to have a greater understanding of all of these channels so that they can appropriately kind of plan and also be reactive. You have brands like Burger King will go and put out an amazing, you know, Super Bowl ad, but then also work at a really, you know, clever guerrilla style social media level too. I think that there's still a lot of scope for marketers to do sort of everything, but also be very focused. I mean, Patagonia, for example, is obviously an amazing brand that knows itself very well, is very purpose-driven, has a very specific view on the world, and engages its audience and its consumers at a particular level. So, they release a feature film that is going to appeal to a very specific audience, but they're just driving harder down on that audience for greater brand love and greater investment for everything that they do.
Yeah.
They're not going to go and do the huge television campaigns year on year.
So when you think of the Clive Owens in the BMW project, or Christian Slater in the Hewlett Packard, small bits of branded content, are we going to see more of these businesses sort of wanting to get onto the Amazons and the Netflix of this world, by sort of not being so obviously or in product placing, but just being noted as a sponsor of that content? I mean, there's a big IP conversation around that and how that negotiation happens. But
exactly, and the platform's own specific kind of agenda around brands as well. I actually think the future lies in brand-owned platforms. I think that we'll see more and more. Red Bull streaks ahead of everyone, but everybody is very happy to consume content and entertainment from them as a brand, and they have a very, very powerful platform, and I actually think that's where brands will end up. Because
everyone can do it. The cost of doing it has dropped to such an extent that it's possible. How did Red Bull, or was that just a complete visionary piece of leadership? Do you know anything about that story? How did that come about?
Well, we know that the bull never speaks. So, but in fact, Red Bull's actually a member of ours, and I was with them yesterday. They have always been very single-minded about their brand, and very single-minded about the benefits of a singular product, and they want to engage and entertain, and that's what. And so yes, they have been very single-minded in terms of their leadership around that space, and they're very. But I think what's really interesting about Red Bull is that they're so well established as a publisher, or as a platform, as an entertainment studio. They are now in this really exciting space where they're looking to partner with other brands, and they're actually being, brands can partner together to deliver really exciting content and entertainment. The space is big enough, as long as the story is authentic and that the partnership makes sense at a creative level, but also at a brand messaging level. I think that's also a really exciting space for branded content, because, pulling together, no longer do you feel like partnering with a brand is either kind of crowding each other. One can really enhance the other's experience and give authenticity for a piece of content existing, or, partnering with talent. So, yeah.
On the talent side of things, I think, if the structural change that's going on in the creative agency space and the media space, obviously because of the flattening of hierarchies because of the internet, you see. I definitely get a sense at Movidiam and Movidiam Talent, which we specifically represent talent that we put into brands or put into in-house production studios. We see that there's a huge wave of creative people coming out, because of tools like Instagram makes everyone sort of have use their creative gene, and it's this wave of people that are actually going to be able to service the demand for all the content that is on these different channels. It's always been the case that you're only as good as the ideas. How do you think the industry is supporting these truly excellent people that come up with the craft, and the directors, producers, visual effects artists that are actually at the rock face delivering the work?
It is a really exciting time for talent, and I think that the choices are massive, and I also think the barriers around going and doing 3 years at a creative agency and then going and working for as a writer on a publishing platform, or going to direct, I think there's less boundaries around what talent can do. So I think that the challenge that the industry holds is that when you're trying to tool up and you're trying to bring talent in and retain that talent, and for the talent to grow, I think it's very hard for kind of single service offering companies to retain that talent. And I think that's why people are, there's so much kind of acquisition and
moving around,
because I think that otherwise, if you're doing the same thing every day in this industry, I think if you're producing a television ad day in and day out for the next 5 years, I think you're going to really struggle, because that's only one tiny piece of the conversation and only one tiny piece of how you service clients.
Not only has the industry got to be practical and agile in its approach, but actually the individuals have got to be agile getting a wider skill set, so they can
Absolutely.
do an Instagram story as well as a TV commercial. There's an amusing term that I've heard, which is the predator, which is the producer, director, editor. And as the fax and the telephone and the printer have all been put into the iPhone, like these roles have been merged into one, because it's actually more efficient to deal with someone that understands sort of 360 degrees of that process, especially if the budgets are shorter and the turnaround sort of. But of course, can you deliver the same sort of craft without the independent elements that were formerly there?
If you look at the television industry, that predator has been there forever. Very much the role in terms of how you produce, factual entertainment television day in and day out, is that you are multi-skilled and you can pick up the camera and you can shoot a piece to camera, and you can also do, write the script, and you can run home and piece it together.
Yeah.
So I actually think that the advertising industry is following other, because we're all moving to entertainment, we're all moving to, no longer trying to disrupt and give a very kind of singular piece of information in 30 seconds. I think that new talent model is actually just replicating other industries. Again, you look at journalists, they're able to, shoot the photography and pick up the story and pull it together from an editorial perspective. I think that sort of multidiscipline is a modern phenomenon, but I think is something that everybody's going to have to be.
Well, Jess, it's been a very interesting conversation about your journey and the narrative around branded content. For our listeners that might not be absolutely familiar with the Branded Content Marketing Association, could you just tell us a little bit about what you offer to the community?
Mm-hmm. So the BCMA is the leading global member association for branded content practitioners, and so it's run by practitioners. We operate in 14 different countries, so we are essentially our own members because we all still produce content or work for brands, and we define and promote best practice to grow the branded content industry. So our key values are promote, support, educate. Our members are really broad from where they come from. So we have media agencies, creative agencies, we've got production companies, post-production companies, we've got individuals who might be freelance journalists. We've also got, individuals who are producers, strategists. But we pull the community together because branded content can be confusing. It may mean different things to different people. We've tried to create a blueprint around best practice in lots of different areas so that we are a resource for information. But we also look to really promote the value of it and the effectiveness of it. So, in terms of our activities with events and workshops, and we run a mentor program, we kind of try and have every sort of base covered to make sure that our members can essentially understand, produce and use branded content in the best way they possibly can.
Brilliant, Jess. Well, in a world that's evolving so quickly and the digital fragmentation, it makes a lot of sense. So, Jess Ringshall,
Absolutely.
Thanks so much indeed for your time today on the Creative Leaders Podcast. Perhaps we can catch up 6 months down the line when you've no doubt got a whole host of new stories around the evolving nature of branding content.
I'd love that. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to the Movidiam Podcast. Movidiam is a world-class network of production talent complemented by secure tools that blend hiring, communication, and payments. Find out more at movidiam.com.